Leon swung his sword. Karen pulled out her kunai. She deflected his sword with her kunai. Then she changed her stance. Suddenly the girl made an incredibly fast dash. She ended up behind Leon's. Her kunai was right next to Leon's eye. Leon pressed his foot into the ground so hard that the ground cracked. He immediately jumped to the side. The girl stood on her toes and said that he could move his legs better than she thought. She stood half-turned to him and said that he would be more suited to the image of an assassin than a knight. Leon smiled evilly. Karen had a bright aura about her as she spoke about how Leon's movements were currently the same as those of a talented recruit, and the techniques themselves were not bad, but there were obvious gaps. Then she immediately disappeared from the spot. Two girls were running towards Leon, and so he realized that she had created an illusory double in just 2 steps. Leon's eye glowed blue and he mentally said that if he was going to catch up with her speed, he would need to use the precognition technique. And then Karen swung at him. He swung his sword, deciding that the fake was on the left. Karen's eyes widened in shock because she realized that Leon had figured out the original. Leon swung his sword and almost hit her on the head, and the girl indignantly asked if he really wanted to say that he could tell the difference between the real thing and the fake. There was a lot of sweat on Leon's face. Karen moved away from him and said that she almost didn't use aura and moved like in a real fight. She raised one leg and offered to test how perceptive he was. Leon frowned in surprise. 6 Karen doubles appeared in front of him because she used her technique. Earlier, when she created only one double, Leon clearly saw an illusory double, and now in front of him, something else, not a basic cloning technique. The girl smiled and said that she was starting the attack, and the young man thought that the speed itself was lower than before. But the problem was the multifaceted nature which made his eyes dazzle. The clones surrounded Leon from both sides and he experienced complete disorientation in space. Leon's eyes turned red because they were so tense that it seemed to him that they would fall out of their sockets. Suddenly, Karen was behind him. She put a kunai to his neck and said that he would already be dead. She smiled and said that thus out of 102 fights, she won all of them. The boy raised his hands and asked if she was really having so much fun bullying a younger comrade who hadn't even reached B rank. And the girl replied that of course she was. After all, it was great fun. She spread her arms out to the sides and explained that the effect of the aura was similar to strengthening the body, especially since there were no throws, and also, according to her, Leon should have taken into account that they were fighting in an open area. Leon sat down on the floor and lowered his head while Karen was talking about how all the conditions were extremely favorable for him. But despite all this, he was unable to achieve a single victory. Leon remembered how he fought against the huge monster. He remembered how he cut it into pieces. He had also defeated another strong opponent, and so he thought that he had achieved significant growth. But the gap in strength with Karen was colossal. He looked at the girl and thought that he should also take into account that she was not fighting him at full strength. Leon smiled and asked her what she thought of the last attack. The girl looked away and said that it was quite passable. As the sun began to set, Karen exclaimed that she was joking and that Leon did a great job. She raised her finger and said that if he was able to see her illusionary double, then she could safely say that even a first-class assassin would have a hard time fighting him. And she also said that Leon's abilities had already surpassed B rank. Leon raised his eyebrows in surprise and asked if this was despite the fact that he was unable to materialize his aura. Karen materialized an aura around her hand and said that the aura was indeed a powerful weapon, but if he dodged the blow, it was in the back. And Leon's vision and body movements, according to her, had reached a level at which such a maneuver was possible. She imagined a chopped axe and said that the tangible aura could cut through iron. Karen imagined some kind of battle and said that the aura itself was not able to pursue and defeat enemies who dodged attacks, and most assassins were often one step behind adventurers of similar rank. The assassin was walking behind the adventurer, and the girl said that the only way to win was to outsmart the opponent by any means necessary, but that was also called winning. Karen was surrounded by aura and standing on corpses, so she said that the Undertaker also simply hit targets from a distance. She lowered her head and began to talk about the pros and cons of the Leons. The girl remembered how she summoned 2 clones, after which, her eyes widened in surprise. Leon struck his sword and almost hit her, so she began to tell him that since Leon had a sharp eye, he was not easy to fool, but he just did not let himself be fooled. The girl looked at him seriously, and he raised his eyebrows in surprise because she began to tell him that he had no skills to deceive the enemy at all. So after repelling an attack, it was difficult for him to take the initiative into his own hands. Leon put his hand to his chin and thought about deceiving the enemy. She immediately grabbed him by the neck and told him not to rack his brains too much, because in the end, cheating is just filling a gap in skills, which is the basis for creating a basis for maneuver. She raised her hand and said that she did not know what his mentor was, but she could tell that Leon's mentor must be either an incredible genius or an unprecedented monster. The Velcet appeared in the Leon's head, smiling evilly. Clouds floated across the sky, and Karen was talking about Leon's lack of creativity in his attacks or movements. The corners of her lips turned down, and she said that he certainly didn't have to copy her, but she thought it would be nice to have a few different cards up his sleeve. Leon frowned and began to think that Karen was right. Maybe he really shouldn't neglect tricks that could ensure an unconditional victory. He clenched his fist tightly, and thought that maybe he really would become stronger if he added some variety to his arsenal of moves. Suddenly, a monster's hand appeared on his shoulder. The shadow of an undertaker appeared above him, asking him if he was okay with moving on to the next lesson. Karen smiled and said that now they would try to make Leon's aura tangible to create an aura weapon. The wind blew the curtains by the open window. The girl asked where she left off last time. It was probably the relationship between the aura attribute and the teaching method she decided to add to what she had said earlier. Karen raised her index finger, saying that it was worth noting that the aura was a force created by filtering the body of its owner, a kind of disclosure of the essence of the owner of the aura. Leon frowned, repeating her words. She imagined a man standing with a sword in front of a crowd. He turned around and ran away. The girl said that the basis is the life experience and worldview of the subject. Even if we consider as an example a situation with an inevitable clash with an enemy, someone boldly enters the battle, someone hides behind someone else's back, and someone just runs away. Karen folded her arms across her chest, saying that it was impossible to distinguish good from evil based only on sides, no matter how strong the desire for justice was. One only had to deviate slightly from the intended course, and this would immediately result in the formation of excessive self-confidence in one's own strength and extreme egoism. Training the aura meant making its essence purer and more powerful. She imagined a man in a dark robe around a fire, citing the fire attribute as an example, constantly destroying something, fighting with someone or exhausting oneself to the limit. Most of these actions lead to the formation of the purest consistency of the fiery aura. In the hero's hand were bright streams of red flame. The guy noted that it was somehow scary. The girl leaned on the windowsill, saying that depending on the attribute, the difficulty of training also differs. In the case of her shadow attribute, the training consisted of completing missions assigned to her. Karen turned her head and smiled, saying that the attribute of the sun symbolizes the goddess and has been manifested in the hero of a particular era for generations. Leon's eyes widened in surprise, looking at her. The girl took off her glasses, asking what comes to mind when he hears the word sun. Above the mountains was a blue sky with bright sunbeams. It was an endless light that brightly illuminated the entire world or completely dispelled the darkness around itself. The guy frowned, thinking about these words. He looked at his palm. Karen noticed that he drew a certain parallel. There were stone fragments in the seething lava flows. The hero assumed that this was because he was extremely excited by the previous training. But he felt a boiling aura spreading through his veins, like magma flowing under the surface of the earth. Streams of bright light appeared around his hand. He thought that with the help of the power of the spirit, it was necessary to pull the flow a little and collect it with a feeling of concentration on the tips of his fingers. Streams of energy surrounded his palm. It was like an incredible heat, as if something was burning. He thought that everything went smoothly before the concentration process. But how could he release the aura out? Leon looked forward furiously, thinking that since it was the sun, then without a doubt it was all about the light. Leon gritted his teeth, concentrating a bright sphere in his palm. Karen opened her eyes in surprise. A bright light appeared around the ball, although the volume was not large enough to use as a weapon. But nevertheless, he managed to release a cloud of aura. The guy closed his eyes when the sphere released a shockwave of energy. The girl put her hand on his shoulder, asking if he was okay. The hero gritted his teeth, imagining a bright stream of energy around his body. He thought that he did not know how high the boundaries of aura materialization were when he borrowed its power. Karen smiled, saying that it was amazing. The basis of creating a material aura is the control of the aura flowing out of the body, similar to how it is done inside the corporeal shell. Leon was breathing heavily, while the girl was saying that even if it was just light or something like that. The main thing is that he was able to hold the cloud of aura in his hands for a few seconds, because there is no big difference between what he just did and using an aura weapon. Bright streams of light appeared above the hero's hand, reminiscent of claws. She noted that if he can use his aura more stably and increase the range of coverage, then his training will be completely complete. Leon raised his eyebrows, repeating her words in surprise. Karen looked away, trying to explain it to him correctly. She imagined bright streams of energy flowing through the human body, saying that it was like recognizing the flow of aura like a blood vessel and gradually pulling it out of the body. Aura weapons consume a lot of energy, so stable circulation is important. The hero opened the door behind her, adding that materializing aura based on a single mental image is too much like gambling. With a strong release of the flow of aura, continuous use becomes impossible, similar to aura weapons such as a fire attribute explosion or eruption. Leon looked at the bishop, assuming that he would finish his inspection. Jezer smiled nervously, saying that he had received a preliminary assessment of the damage they had done to the temple some time ago. The heroes froze in place, smiling awkwardly back at him. The currents of wind lifted the curtains by the window. The man remarked that they would talk about the repair bills a little later, but for now he wanted to get to the main thing. Jezer smiled and held up an envelope in his hand, saying that he brought a letter from the saint. Jezer's eyes widened, mentally repeating his words. The man noticed that the succession ceremony was in full swing. A cold wind raged over the snow-capped mountain slopes. In the distance, tall black towers could be seen. 2 bright streams of light appeared on their tops. The flash illuminated the peaks of the Rocky Mountains. The girl opened her mouth. The heroes opened their eyes in surprise, saying that personally receiving the sacred power of more than 10 bishops is incredible. Because even someone worthy of the boundaries of unrivaled skill would not be able to receive such power and would explode. Who would have thought that it would break through the power of the previous saint during the succession ceremony? The woman in a white cape smiled, greeting the 8th saint, Elahan. The girl with pink hair was dressed in a long white dress. Today the strongest saint supporting the hero was born. Elahan's eyes widened, looking ahead. A group of people in white robes walked towards the entrance. There was a spiked mace embedded in the stone floor. The heroes approached her, saying that 300 years ago, the first saint who accompanied the great hero, the most holy King Rodrigo, realized her helplessness during her travels, not only to pray for the hero's well-being. Calling on someone's power of her own free will, she herself must have the power to defeat evil. The girl stood behind the hero with a sword. In the boy's hand was a spiked mace. The Iron Castle was created by the order of the first saint. Now their church has become one of the strongest armed groups on the continent. The girl stood with the mace on her shoulder, looking forward. Under the name of the goddess, from generation to generation, the saints received the rank of vice-captains. The hero smiled, saying that this place was created to support the hero. Based on this, one could say that great grace had descended upon her, for she could fight side by side. This was the life that all saints dreamed of and aspired to. Elahan smiled, looking forward and saying that it was so. The voice announced the last and food she needed to prepare for battle. The girl took off her white dress from her shoulder. She took a step forward. Bright streams of energy surrounded her body. Elahan appeared in a white robe, over which was golden armor. The girl reached for a mace with spikes. She frowned, raising the weapon above her. The man opened his mouth, saying that this was a great mace, a weapon of saints of past generations. The hero next to him noted that it was an amazing sight. People in white robes stood at the edge of a snowy mountain. The hero announced that in front of them, left by the Holy King, was the largest sword mark in this world. They say that he left this mark with just one swing. In front of them were half-destroyed stone cliffs. At the edge of the mountain were triangular cuts. He noticed that the marks carved into the rock were what the well-fed left during the succession ceremony. Now it was Elahan's turn. The girl frowned, tightly clutching the weapon in her hands. The streams of strong wind among the mountains lifted Elahan's cloak higher. She lowered her head, thinking about what she was told, that the hero was active. The guy froze when the flow of strong energy lifted stone fragments into the air. Leon stood in front of the preacher in the form of a monster. Leon moved forward, leaving a bright energy trail behind him. The guy stood with his back. The girl thought about the fact that there were still 6 months until the Oracle Day, and he had already managed to do so much for the benefit of society. Elahan closed her eyes, thinking that she, finally officially a saint, wouldn't make him blush. Leon smiled, thinking that she couldn't even imagine how brave and courageous the hero was, which is why she needed to become a saint who would be completely comparable to him. The girl frowned, tightly clutching the mace in her hands. A bright stream of light surrounded her body and lifted her white cloak. She swung the mace, saying that sinners would be punished. Elahan abruptly lowered the mace to the ground, lifting stone fragments into the air. Streams of energy broke the rock in several places. The hero opened his eyes in surprise, looking at this. The man and the 2 boys opened their mouths in surprise. The girl froze when a wide passage appeared in the mountain in front of her from the blow. She smiled, thinking that she was not strong enough for the hero, but she really wanted him to let her be near him. Elahan opened her shining eyes wide, looking ahead. The apostle held the letter in his hands, reading the girl's words that she, as the one who inherited the name of the Iron Castle Church, would gladly dedicate her life to Leon. Jezza smiled, noticing that at the end it was written that the girl hoped that she could see him as soon as possible. Leon raised his eyebrows in surprise. He froze, not understanding why he felt like he was thrown into a vat of cold water because he felt that trouble was about to knock on his door. The white curtains were raised by the open window. The guy asked what kind of person the saint was. The man replied that she was considered one of the most outstanding in history, not only for her faith but also for her qualities. This would definitely be a great help to the hero. Leon lowered his head, thinking that he had no idea whether this was good news for him or not. Because if the saint who was considered the hero's companion for generations was so excellent, then he needed to become a skilled warrior who would not be ashamed to stand next to such a saint. Leon rubbed his chin thoughtfully, thinking that now he finally grasped the essence of using an aura weapon. All that was left was to form an image. The bishop widened his eyes when the boy asked if the moon was his attribute. The man confirmed his words. The boy extended his hand forward, apologizing for such a tactless question, but could he please know what image Jezza used to complete the aura weapon? The bishop widened his eyes. Karen opened her mouth in shock. She made a cross with her hands, mentally asking the boy to stop, because such a strong aura user should not be asked such a question, because telling the image of his aura weapon was the same as revealing his weaknesses. Jezza smiled, saying that he would tell them about the image of his aura weapon. He imagined the appearance of a full moon behind the clouds, saying that he imagined its phases, a tiny crescent moon when using a small amount of power, a half moon when using average power, and a full moon when he fought at his limit. In addition, there are transformations such as a transparent moon and a lunar eclipse. The hero imagined how the masked man extended his hand forward. The monster's body was cut by iron chains. The mace with spikes destroyed the creature's body. Leon frowned, saying that he had as many as 5 options. Karen smiled, thinking about how the bishop told them so easily. Did he really trust them that much? The boy widened his eyes, thinking about the 5 forms of the moon. He imagined the lunar phases, from a crescent moon to a full red moon. Leon looked ahead, thinking that, unlike the moon, the sun's force is constant, so it would be impossible to construct an image like the bishop's. Leon imagined a bright sun. It gradually blocked out the moon until an eclipse occurred. He thought that it was quite possible to create an image of a solar eclipse, because if they understood the image of an eclipse as an accumulation of power, then the sun, which always burns brightly itself, is the personification of continuity. So in this situation, he just needs to solve the problem of its simultaneous existence with the eclipse. Leon rubbed his chin and smiled. Jezza closed his eyes, noticing that the boy seemed to have an epiphany. Leon clenched his hands into fists, saying that it was so, he would like to demonstrate what he realized right now, to give a clearer form to the thoughts that visited him. The boy stood on the field with a sword, looking at the bishop. The hero frowned and raised the blade, offering to begin. Jezza spun the mace on the chain in his hand, saying that he liked the expression on the boy's face. He asked to show him what kind of insight had come to him. Bright streams of energy surrounded the tip of the sword. The hero thought about trying to make the aura materialize properly. The bishop directed the mace on the chain forward, saying that he was attacking. Leon gritted his teeth, parrying the weapon with the sword extended in front of him. Rock fragments and streams of dust rose into the air behind the boy. He tightly gripped the hilt of the sword with both hands. The hero opened his mouth, taking a deep breath. The boy frowned, thinking that this was not the right feeling, because active use was still difficult, although in this training he only needed to respond to the bishop's attack. But even though he was adjusting his power, the hero should not forget that he was dealing with an aura weapon. The slightest contact with the chain would tear his flesh apart. Jezza spun the mace on the chain in his hand. He pointed the weapon at Leon's. The guy thought about the fact that he didn't have to constantly block and dodge. He needed to calculate the trajectory and aim for the gap in the defense. The mace was approaching Leon's face. He thought about the fact that for a weapon like chains, keeping a distance is life. Because if it gets closer, it will be able to block half of the techniques. First of all, you need to dodge. The guy moved from his place, leaving a bright trace behind him. Leon's eyes widened as the chains began to move around his body. He froze, holding his sword in front of him. Jezza frowned, asking if he was sure he could dodge this attack. The guy gritted his teeth, wondering if it was possible. He threw doubts aside, because he had to cope, no matter what. The hero broke the ground under his foot. He opened his mouth. Bright streams of energy enveloped his sword. The bishop opened his eyes in surprise. The chains surrounded the body of the Leons. Leon raised his sword above himself, imagining the image of a solar eclipse. He thought that by using the reproduction of the sword of the Big Dipper, he would demonstrate the sword of the eclipse. There was a bright constellation in the dark sky. The first thing the hero was striving for was the second technique of the great chariot, Merak. The hero imagined himself behind the monster. The stars shone brightly in the dark sky. This would not be an unconscious repetition for long, but a manifestation of his own will. First you need to compress the aura and put it into the blade. Not allowing it to go beyond its limits, the problem lies in releasing the aura, and the solution to the materialization of the aura that he managed to find is the sword of the eclipse. Bright streams of energy enveloped the tip of the sword. The eyes of Leon shone. With the solar eclipse in the sky, a bright stream of energy emanated from the sword in his hands. The bishop opened his eyes in surprise. The mace with spikes was cut into two parts with one swing of the guy. Leon held the sword out in front of him, saying that it was still an unstable technique. The constellation was shining in the dark sky. The hero said that he was as far away from mastering the Big Dipper sword as the moon, so he would use the eclipse sword as a temporary measure, although it could be said that he had created his own simplified method to use the perfect technique in its unfinished form. The guy opened his mouth, breathing heavily. The hero clenched his hand into a fist, thinking that he now had a technique in his arsenal that he could use to strike his opponent. The bishop came closer, saying that Leon was great. The guy apologized for destroying his favorite weapon. Karen brought her hand to her mouth, asking them to open their doors here. A guest had come to the Leons. Lee folded her hands in front of her and smiled, saying that they had not seen each other for a long time. The guy happily raised his eyebrows and smiled. The building had a dark roof. Lee sat at the table with the others, saying that it was their first time meeting outside the guild. She asked if everything was okay with his health. The guy looked at her, saying that he was fine. The girl said that she was worried about him, so she grabbed a high-quality tonic potion and some other things. The girl smiled, handing the hero a box with a reward that the Lord gave him. Inside was an iridescent bracelet with a spatial charm. It was not very big, but she was sure that it would be useful. Karen opened her mouth wide, screaming that such a thing would cost several hundred gold coins. If not for the simple design, then it would generally fetch more than 1,000 gold. Lee smiled, saying that she expected this from her because she knows a lot about such things. The girl pointed to her earring, saying that they are the same charm. Karen summoned a blade into her hand, saying that due to its small capacity, she could only store small items inside. Leon looked at her, thinking that he had always wondered where she got these daggers from. The guy put the bracelet on his hand. Leon held his hand out in front of the potion, ordering it to move into the bracelet. The flask with the red potion began to be absorbed. An image of a potion appeared in the icon above the bracelet. Leon thought that it was a rather convenient magical tool. Count Blaine, who gave him such a thing, was much more generous and magnanimous than he thought. Lee clasped her hand with her palm, saying that the second reason for her arrival was his transition to rank B. The girl raised a badge with an image of a rank in her hands, saying that he had all the necessary conditions for increasing the rank, so he just had to show the aura weapon and she would immediately give him a token. The guy opened his eyes wide. The one-eyed monster smiled. The hero realized that it was 100 days early. It was a pity that he wouldn't be able to see it. The hero gripped the sword's hilt tightly. A bright stream of energy rushed upward. Lee opened her eyes wide, saying that the presence of an aura weapon was confirmed. The boy held a token in his hands. Leon raised it in front of him, thinking that when he was studying at the academy, he could not even dream of becoming a B-rank adventurer. Jazar and Karen clapped their hands, congratulating the boy. Lee held a paper in her hands, saying that the last purpose of her visit was that they had received the request he was looking for. The hero opened his eyes wide, saying that he did not understand what she was talking about. The girl opened her green eyes wide, asking if he was not going to be on duty as a guard for the guild. Leon opened his eyes wide, frozen in place. Karen looked at him. The map showed the route with a red arrow. The trade caravan was heading to the Titanium Mountains. Blaine was only a temporary stop. As soon as the provisions were replenished, it would move on again. Lee winked and raised her index finger up, asking if he had forgotten who she was since he asked her for a favor she had barely carved out one place for him. Beads of sweat were running down the hero's face. Karen looked at him with displeasure, asking why only one place. The guy put his hand in front of himself, saying that he did not yet know that she would follow him. Lee looked at the heroes, seeing her off. To intimidate the problem that had arisen, the guy decided to seek help from the bishop, who had strong ties with the guild. The girl also happily agreed to contact him if there were any changes, and until an answer was received from the guild, they continued to train hard. Karen hovered above Leon in the air, preparing to strike. She was clutching the blade in her hand. Leon frowned, thinking that this speed was incredible. Perhaps the only thing that could be more dangerous than the art of throwing daggers was her speed. Karen's eyes widened, looking at him. Leon gritted his teeth, holding his sword out in front of him to repel the attack. The girl smiled, assuming that it was because his eyes were probably looking at the enemy. The guy opened his eyes wide, thinking that he couldn't rely on his vision. First of all, the purpose of this training was to compensate for the shortcomings of the foresight technique. The hero froze. Imagining himself among the bright stripes, he thought that he needed to improve his ability to sense the ore, because then he would be able to use the eclipse sword he needed to concentrate. He paid attention to the change in gusts of air and the slight tremors of the earth. The girl frowned, holding her hand with the blade out in front of her. The guy moved. Karen was hovering behind him. Leon smiled, thinking that he managed to sense it. He turned around, frowning at her. The girl's eyes widened in surprise. Karen quickly jumped back, falling to the ground. She smiled, saying that it was amazing. She never expected him to master the sense of aura so quickly. The guy raised his eyebrows and smiled, saying that it was all thanks to her. The girl blushed and widened her eyes. Karen squeezed her hand around his neck, asking what he just said. The hero thought that if he did not forget this feeling and continued to use it, time after time, he could become much stronger than he was now. Leon smiled, confidently looking forward. Leon's brother clapped his hands, congratulating the guy, because he once again demonstrated magnificent growth. The bishop smiled, pressing his hands to his chest and saying that he had good news. He had agreed to meet the guild leader that had set up camp not far from here today after lunch, so he thought that if he met in person, the boy would be able to easily resolve the problem that had arisen. The heroes clasped their hands, imagining Jeezer with wings on his back. There were white clouds in the blue sky. The hero noticed that they had arrived just in time. The boy stopped, looking at the tents ahead. Leon smiled, suggesting to the girl standing next to him that they head to the camp. There were white clouds in the sky. There was a man standing at the entrance to the tent. The hero asked if it was a man from the guild. The boy showed a badge, saying that he was AB rank. The man folded his hands in front of himself, saying that his name was Arnold. He was from the Stammguild. He extended his hand to the hero, saying that they were a small guild, so he hoped for their mutual cooperation. The young man shook his hand, noticing that he wanted to do the same. Arnold frowned. The boy opened his mouth, thinking that the man's hands were not like a swordsman's. Now in front of him was a deformed hand, which is typical for a scribe. He thought that this was a man who had lived honestly and sincerely much longer than he himself had been, holding a sword in his hands. Leon's hands were calloused. In the man's hand was a writing quill. Arnold smiled, noticing that the hero's handshake exuded courage. Leon grinned. They shook their hands joyfully, and one voice declared that they were counting on each other. There was a red flag on the tent. The man sat at the table in front of them, saying that they needed another place. However, they were limited in budget. He was not sure if they had the opportunity to hire another escort. The boy asked if the destination was the Titanium Mountains. Arnold confirmed his words. Leon imagined a dark mountain with a bright red light, saying that it was a dangerous climb. If their caravan was accompanied by an orang adventure on the dangerous path, then a very reliable insurance would be in their hands. Leon opened his glowing eyes wide, raising his index finger up. Leon's mouth opened in surprise, repeating his words about the orangut. The man cleared his throat, saying that it was indeed a reliable insurance, but hiring one costs a lot of money, and it was also worth adding the daily rations. He clenched his hand into a fist, saying that he doubted that an orang adventure would guard such a small guild. The girl took out a token and raised it in her hand. Karen leaned her head on her hand, apologizing for introducing herself so late. Loud conversations could be heard against the clear sky. The man happily welcomed such an honored guest into his tent. He remarked that someone who is called a merchant should have a keen eye. Apparently, he was still not good enough in this regard. The girl smiled and pointed her thumb at Leon's, saying that he did not have to worry about money because she was here to accompany the guy, so the reward could be set at B rank level. The man secured the document with his seal. Arnold smiled and clasped his hands in front of him, saying that they were extremely limited in funds, so he asked to forgive him for daring to take advantage of their concession. Next time he would definitely pay for her services at a rank level. Karen took the sheet in her hands and smiled, saying that she should apologize for unexpectedly appearing on his doorstep. The man remarked that he would allocate the most comfortable leash for her and provide her with all the essentials. Leon looked at her, asking if it was okay for him to fawn over them like that. The girl closed her eyes, saying that it was supposed to be like that since she was in a rank. There were white clouds in the blue sky. Leon asked if everything was okay. Karen smiled, saying that the man had managed to hire an orang adventurer for cheap so they could enjoy the amenities provided with peace of mind. Leon's eyes widened, looking at the mercenaries off to the side. Two guys with guns were standing next to the tent. Karen nudged him, asking if this was the first time he saw mercenaries. The hero rubbed the back of his head, saying that he had seen them from afar but never up close, even during the operation. Had he crossed paths with other armed forces? The guy imagined the fighting warriors. The hero with blonde hair had a red cape flowing. The mercenary smirked as he looked ahead. The hero thought that they all looked very strong, but the looks they were throwing at him were not friendly at all. Karen raised her hand, noting that the mercenaries had some prejudices against adventurers, but it would be fine if both sides did not provoke each other. Leon looked away, thinking that he would soon say goodbye to this city too. The boy looked down from the mountain at the city below, wondering if he would ever return here. He remembered looking at the tall castle, thinking that after he left the birdcage called the Academy, many things had happened to him in this city. The boy remembered himself by the fire. A bird was flying over the city surrounded by white walls. The hero remembered the smiling Lai, the self-made Khan, and Jazar with a mace in his hands. Leon smiled, thinking that even if other places were erased from memory, he thought it would be difficult for him to forget this city if possible. He would like to leave after he awakened, but if he missed this request, it was unknown when he would have such a chance again because trade caravans rarely headed towards the Titanium Mountains. He imagined a sword and iron shackles. Leon frowned, thinking that the most important thing was that he could not rely on Elsid alone. Even if at the end of their operation he had no choice but to accept his help, it was more suitable for the hero not to sit idly by, even if Elsid was temporarily absent. The bright sun was rising above the stone houses. The heroes stood at Jazar near the building. The man asked the goddess to bless their path. During the day in the form of the sun, at night in the form of the moon, she would watch over them. Leon bowed, thanking him for everything he had done for him. The man smiled, saying that he should have said these words himself because if it weren't for that fateful meeting, they would never have been able to defeat that city devourer. He imagined a monster with many teeth in its mouth, saying that it could be called the water of the goddess that led them to this goal. Leon's eyes shone brightly. A blinding explosion thundered behind him. The bishop handed the object to the young man, saying that he would like to pass on something to him. In his palm was a pendant with an image of wings. This is a necklace that contains sacred power. This is an item that can be used for healing purposes. It should be used when the heroes find themselves in a situation where it will be difficult to draw the holy sword. Leon put the pendant on his neck, thanking the man for the gift. He thought that when he is immersed in sleep, he really needs this item. Jazar smiled, noticing that this relic had a hidden function. The boy opened his eyes in surprise, asking what it was. The man frowned and imagined the army behind him, saying that if he showed this necklace to someone in the church's upper echelons, he would be able to summon all the nearby knights of the Iron Castle Order. The Leon's mouth widened, repeating his words in surprise. The bishop smiled, saying that they should use it with extreme caution. Because someone who is not its owner can only use this function once, the boy took the pendant in his palm, thanking him for such a valuable gift. Leon examined the pendant in his hand, thinking that this was the ability to mobilize all the forces of the Iron Castle Order, even if the summoning was one time. It was hard to say what its price was. If a situation similar to the one that happened here arose, this necklace would become a thunderous help. There were white clouds in the blue sky. Carts pulled by horses moved along the road. Arnold smiled and clasped his hands together, wishing the heroes a good morning. He asked if they were done with their morning routine. The man asked them to try the breakfast he had prepared. There was fried chicken, bread, pie and more on the table. Leon froze in place, saying that he didn't have to show so much concern. There was a red flag on the tent. The guy noticed that he had overeaten. He still thought that the man was overdoing it. The girl nudged him, asking if this was the first time someone had treated him like this. Because he had an expression on his face like he was about to sink into the ground from awkwardness, Leon closed his eyes, saying that it was all because of her. Karen frowned, looking at him. She smiled, suggesting that they might have a little extra trouble. Leon raised his eyebrows in confusion. He opened his eyes in surprise, looking to the sides. The mercenaries were looking at them with brightly shining eyes. The guy put his sword on his shoulder, not taking his eyes off them. Leon smiled, asking if there really would be few problems. While Leon was looking around, Karen looked at the sky. Turning to the guy, she said that there were many who had begun to hate them. Leon glanced at her sharply and froze in amazement. The events take us to a meadow, along the edges of which grew trees. A group of merchants on horses passed through the meadow. Sitting in one of the carts, Leon told Karen that they were moving faster than usual. Karen, closing her eyes, said that it was all because two horses were pulling a body with a spell carved on it. The magic circle on the cart was a lightweight spell. It was one of the most useful and common spells. This spell also had its drawbacks. The wheels of the cart became unstable to collisions due to the light weight. In areas with steep descents and ascents, such as the Titan Mountains, you will have to turn off the lightweight spell. The sun began to set, decorating the sky in bright color. The caravan set up camp for the night. The cheerful guy got up and offered the girl to get out of the cart. The girl replied saying that she did not really want to. He lay down in the cart and said that she was not hungry yet, so he would walk alone, and if something happened, he would call her. Meanwhile, the cook was preparing soup over the fire. The coachman got off his horse and began to take care of them. Leon, getting off the cart, looked around and realized that everyone was making the necessary preparations so that everyone could rest as much as possible during the halt. The guy frowned, feeling the approach of a person. Turning around, Leon saw Hansen and his comrades. Browsing, Leon asked Hansen if they had any business with him. The red-haired man grinned and told the guy that he was talking as if he was some kind of employer. Leon closed his eyes and said that if they thought so, then he really was talking like a boss. Hamel brought his eyebrows together and grinned widely, telling Leon that he was pretending to be important because he was in the company of an A-rank adventurer here, so he looked like a young impudent fellow. Leon narrowed his eyes, barely holding back his anger. He said that they themselves rushed as a crowd at one, and in the current situation, they were the ones boasting about their strength. The guy grinned and straightened up, saying that his stomach was starting to hurt at the thought that because of some kid, his abilities and experience were reduced to nothing. Hamel's face distorted with anger at what he heard. He approached the guy with a grin on his face. Everyone suddenly turned around, hearing Karen's voice. The silver-haired girl looked at the mercenaries and asked since when they started fighting only verbally. Hansen and Gust have straightened up in horror, as if they were struck by electricity. Standing in front of Leon, Karen pointed at him, asking if they were afraid that since she was on his side, she would intervene at any moment. Gust have enhanced and frowned, and invisible pressure fell on them. Raising his hand, the guy told Karen that if she was ready to ensure a fair referee, then he would like to fight her friend. The girl closed her eyes and smiled, agreeing to the referee. Turning to Leon, she asked him if he was against fighting right now. He smiled and told her that he was not against. Smiling, Leon noted that everything was going as Karen said. He remembered how the girl took a kunai in her hand and said that if the local mercenaries had a biased opinion of them, then they should just show their strength. Looking at his hand, the guy wondered what else it would say if he were here. Imagining his grinning face, Leon decided not to think about it. Looking at the three mercenaries again, Leon became serious. He turned slightly as he walked towards the battlefield. The guy glanced at the clouds in the sky, mentally saying that the mercenaries probably didn't like to see him, a rookie B-rank adventurer, on the same team as an A-rank beauty. Leon narrowed his eyes and grinned. He understood the feelings of the mercenaries perfectly. At this time, Karen stood at the counter and accepted bets for the duel. Leon froze when he saw this. He realized that this beauty had started all this to expand the playing field. Karen, taking the role of the speaker, raised her hand, saying that they were waiting for a duel between a mercenary and an adventurer with a B rank. Arnold shuddered when Karen pointed at him and asked if he wanted to make a bet. Approaching her, the man whispered in her ear who he was betting on. A moment later, both turned to the Leons, giving them a thumbs up. Even a fool would understand who the guild leader was betting on. While the crowd raised their hands and shouted, Leon became serious and stood on the platform. His opponent, Hansen, frowned while the crowd cheered for him. Approaching the guys, Karen said that direct hits from aura weapons are prohibited, and it is also forbidden to use weapons that were not mentioned in advance. Extending a finger, she said that they must first of all follow the instructions without question, and there is no time limit. Hansen immediately stepped back after the instructions were voiced. Leon pulled his leg back, saying that he understood everything. Things flew up when the start of the battle was announced. Leon raised his sword, getting into a stance. Hansen, who stood in front of him, held a spear and a shield. He was one of the rare fighters who used a shield. Leon knitted his eyebrows looking at his opponent. The silver scratches on the shield made it clear that it was not an ordinary protective gear. Squinting, the guy said that this shield was not as simple as it seemed. Hansen grinned and told Leon that he was right, because although it had a lot of metal, mithril was added to the alloy. Several years ago, the dwarf made this shield for him in the forge as thanks for saving him. The sweaty Leon asked the mercenary if it was necessary to reveal the information so easily. Hansen smiled and said that there was nothing to hide, because after a couple of blows, he would have understood anyway. Smiling, the man frowned, saying that he had not originally intended to cheat in a duel with a child. Leon's lips slightly rose. He realized that he was considered a trivial opponent. The guy grinned widely and decided to make Hansen regret it. Leon put his feet in a fighting stance, thinking that he should start with a lightning-fast lunge. He ran and the grass from the ground flew into the air. Swinging his sword, the boy ran towards his opponent, who was covering himself with a shield. Leon looked at him, preparing to strike. Hansen blocked the blow, which was so strong that the ground beneath them cracked. He bared his teeth, looking out from behind the shield, wondering what that was and where Leon got such strength from. Preparing to counterattack, the boy swung his spear. Looking straight at the enemy, Leon parried several blows with his sword, making a quick series of attacks. The mercenary leader thought that the one-handed spear and the mithril alloy shield were a mixture of holding back blows and instant counterattacks, and it was also a fighting style that focused on defense. Many blows rained down on the Leons. Leon thought that by rushing to attack, he was causing damage to himself. blocking another thrust with the hilt. He thought about how he could get rid of the shield by using a clip, but he was not sure that he would be able to cut only the shield. He parried the blow right in front of his shoulder, thinking that he had a very strong pressure. The guy clenched his teeth. Crouching down and moving the sword to the side, the young man analyzed that his opponent had left him no choice and decided to strike him. Raising his hands, the spectators of the fight were surprised by what they saw. Karen watched the fight with her eyes wide open. Leon disappeared from his opponent's field of vision. He kicked the shield. Taking cover from the attack, Hansen watched his actions. With a kick, the Leon parried the shield and shook the enemy's resilience. Stretching out his leg, the young man thought that his opponent was surprised by the kick, not the sword. The mercenary leader frowned, wondering if this man was a true swordsman who adhered to the strict rules of combat. Looking ahead, Leon rushed straight towards him. The fighter extended his shield and spear in front of him. Swinging his sword, Leon prepared to attack the enemy from behind. Smiling, Karen said that these were the steps of an assassin. The blow knocked Hansen off his feet and threw his shield aside. With his mouth wide open, he flew straight to the ground. In front of the mercenary leader's face was a sharp sword. Looking at the Leons, who extended his hand with a sword, Pa admitted that he had lost. And at this time, shouts were heard that the fight was over and the victory was awarded to the adventurer Leon. Holding the bags in his hands, Arnold smiled, while all the spectators were stunned by the result. Smiling, Leon thought that the technique he learned from Karen turned out to be very useful. Remembering Elsid, the boy thought that he would reproach him for imitating a murderer, that he realized that it would be better to have a greater variety of techniques if necessary, and that it was unlikely that he would find anyone other than Rodrigo who could defeat anyone with a single frontal attack. The two mercenaries looked on with furrowed brows, and the man with the beard said that he would be next. The man with the scar shouted that it was enough, and the two recognized him as Commander Gustav. Confused by his appearance, the mercenaries began to sweat, and the commander began to say that they could not realize how great a difference in skill there was between them and this guy. Leon thought that he was the commander of the mercenary squad. The man bowed to him and apologized. With his mouth wide open, Gustav shouted that the guy's skills deserved a B rank, and that it was their fault for blaming his age and causing such a commotion. Smiling, Leon was taken aback by his words. The mercenaries began to cry, and the leader continued that it was sad to realize the fact that despite their mature years, they were on the same level as the guy. The commander recalled how the four of them were sitting in a cart, riding somewhere, and told about it. Then, introducing Leon and Karen, he shouted that he was driving the same cart with a beautiful girl, which is why the company was blinded by envy. Clenching his fist, the man with the scar apologized for their pettiness. Smiling, the guy looked at these people. He extended his hand to them and offered to live in peace. Blinded by his mercy, the whole gang covered their faces with their hands. The leader shook the outstretched hand. The commander, looking straight into the Leon's face, said that now they are in his debt and will wash away this stain of shame someday. To which Leon said that he does not need to talk about some debt. Pointing his finger at the sun, Gustav said that a man's debt was more important than his life, and even if the boy did not accept their will, they would repay him in full, after which he offered the young man to drink together. The moon was visible behind the clouds. 3 people clinked their mugs. Smiling, the men offered Leon another drink. The adventurer emptied the next glass to the joyful cries of the crowd. Leon blushed and smiled. Smiling, Karen looked at her cheerful companion. The bright sun was visible. Sitting on the floor, Leon quietly groaned, and his girlfriend joked that it would be a funny story if he died from drinking alcohol. The guy was sweating and could not say anything. Remembering the plains he rode through, the young man thought that after his reconciliation with the mercenaries, the atmosphere inside the guild had improved greatly. Memories of sitting in the camp next to the defeated enemy came to his mind, and he thought that he had even received an unexpected benefit because the mercenary Hansen, who was from the Northern Army, taught him how to fight mountain orcs. Imagining a crowd of green monsters, Leon thought that the place they were heading to was teeming with these creatures, so such information was very valuable to him. Looking at how one of the brutes tore his clothes, Leon thanked him for the informative story and for answering his many questions. Frowning, the man asked permission to ask a question. Imagining a sleeping Karen, he asked about the relationship between the girl and her partner. The guy widened his eyes and asked again. Imagining her face, Leon thought that he was being asked about the relationship between him and the girl. He sweated and smiled. The young man said with his mouth wide open that he did not understand what the mercenaries were talking about, but they asked him about his secrets. Laughing and blushing, they said that the fact that a girl and a boy who had reached puberty were riding in the same carriage spoke for itself, to which the young man shouted that this was not the case at all. The man, leaning against a tree behind the Leons, asked if in that case the gang should consider them as teacher and student. Frowning, he added that the movements of the two looked quite similar, but they communicated in such a way that it was unclear who was in charge. Lowering his head, Leon thought that this mercenary was called Hamel, and that he had good observation skills due to his previous career as a forester. Scratching the back of his head, Leon said that he and Karen had become close by fulfilling joint requests. But this was not the kind of relationship the men thought, to which they laughed. Standing in front of his three friends, the boy convinced them that they were mistaken. Lying in the carriage, Karen blushed and covered herself with a blanket. Walking through the camp, the boy thought that it looked strange that an A-rank adventurer was riding in a carriage with a B-rank adventurer, and also that anyone looking from the outside would think that she needed him for pleasure. Leon clenched his fist and thought that he was being mistaken for someone who thought the request was a trifle because he had a strong comrade and also understood that he had not earned better treatment yet, so he could not relax. Looking at Gustav, Leon decided that he should use every moment usefully. He turned to the youth with a worried face. A strong blow shook the ground. The blood dripped onto the grass. The bloodied Leon held his sword with another one. Holding his sword with both hands, the commander stood in front of him. The passers-by were surprised by this duel with their mouths open and noticed that the boy was barely breathing. Smiling, the mercenary said that he did not expect that he would withstand his direct attack. Looking at his opponent, the adventurer said that he barely stayed on his feet. Looking straight at the youth, the man said that he could not imagine that he would take his strongest blow instead of dodging. Placing his sword on his shoulder, the warrior smiled. Sitting down on the ground, Leon said that he was also a little disappointed. His opponent, laughing loudly, said that the more he looked at the boy, the more he liked him. Placing his sword on the ground, Leon thought that it was not necessary to respond to force with force because if this were a real fight, he would already be dead. Wiping the blood from his mouth, the boy thanked Gustav for fulfilling his request since it was a good lesson for him. Turning towards the defeated man, the commander offered to contact him at any time and thought that this was an opponent who was difficult to defeat even once in 10 fights and added that it would be useful for him to cross swords with such a talented fighter. Turning away from his interlocutor, the man said that they would not be able to fight each other for some time. Pointing to the trees, he said that tonight they would reach the edge of the forest, which meant it was better not to make noise so as not to run into trouble. Leon looked at his comrade seriously and asked how long it would take to cross the forest. Remembering the forest paths, Gustav said that it would take them at least 3 days, and in the worst case, the road would take 6 days. Looking resolutely at the man, the guy assumed that they would have to fight monsters. Bowing his head, he replied that it was inevitable. Looking at the carts, the leader of the mercenaries said that despite the size of the caravan, they could still try to attack him since the forest had an average level of danger. Opening his mouth, he added that if they met a middling monster on the way, it would definitely attack, to which Leon asked to explain who they were. Remembering the large monsters, the man with the scar said that there were swarms of trolls scurrying about in the forest. Leon looked warily at his friend and realized who he was talking about. The experienced warrior began to explain that adult trolls are 4 to 5 meters tall and, compared to other types of monsters, are so agile that they can climb trees. Imagining such a picture, the guy asked again if this was true, to which he heard the answer that those who have not seen it never take a word for it. With glowing eyes, the guy could not contain his delight. Sitting with his friend by the fire, Leon thought that the information received was completely new and incredible for him, and also remembered that trolls can use goblins or orcs as subordinates. Looking at the fire, the young man thought that such things are not taught at the academy because such knowledge is obtained from personal experience, and was extremely glad to be here. Opening his mouth, Arnold announced that now the caravan will enter the forest that unfolded in front of them and also asked the guards to properly perform their duties. A forest path with carts driving along it was visible. Sweating, Leon thought that he had finally found himself in a forest where monsters lived. Leaning on his sword, the boy thought that he needed to concentrate. Karen, looking at him, asked if it was time to work. Embarrassedly putting away his sword, he replied that you never know when an enemy might appear from the forest. Smiling, the girl said that most likely the monsters would appear only at dawn or during the day. Having comfortably sat down, she advised her partner to just rest, but that he agreed. Sitting down on the floor of the cart, Leon thought that since his companion said so, he could take a short nap because he still had not recovered from the fight with Gustav. Exhaling, the young man decided to tidy himself up before the fight with the monsters. The light of the carts was visible from behind the trees. It was clear that the horses were walking one after another. Opening his eyes, Leon heard Karen addressing him. It was clear that Hamel was sitting on the roof of one of the carts. Sniffing the air, he smelled a certain scent. The man peered into the darkness. He pulled back his bowstring, preparing to release an arrow from his bow. The arrow flew high into the sky. Looking up, the former forester saw it explode, leaving a bright light. Dozens of green monsters appeared in the thicket, while someone shouted that the caravan was under attack. Jumping out of the carriage, the adventurer called for her younger companion to go forward, to which he agreed. Hamel pulled back his bowstring and prepared to release 3 aura arrows at once. Shrouded in a green haze, they immediately rushed forward. The arrows passed through the goblins' bodies, leaving huge holes in them. Releasing his sword on his shoulder, Gustav praised his friend for his excellent work and declared that now it was their turn to work hard. At that moment, as the monsters jumped on them, the man called for his comrades to attack. The mercenaries began to fight the monsters fiercely, killing them with ease. Leon smiled and thought that this was completely different from participating in a punitive detachment to eradicate evil. Looking at how the guys dealt with the goblins, Leon realized that at that time they broke through the enemies, relying on their individual skills, and now there was a situation in which they would have to make various attacks, fighting side by side with each other. The warrior frowned and called out to his younger comrade. The guy raised his sword in front of him, but continued to stand still. The commander put his hand to his forehead and asked if this was his first time participating in a battle of this kind. Gustav opened his mouth wide and shouted that an enemy was approaching from the right. The young man's eyes widened in confusion. At that moment, the swordsman rushed forward to try to attack. 2 monsters pounced on him. The adventurer easily cut them into pieces. Leon raised his eyebrows in surprise and felt a strange sensation on the tip of the sword. Squeezing the hilt, Leon remembered how he killed goblins during training in the forest, and noticed that it had become much easier for him to slash. The guy smiled widely and said that he had become much stronger. A green flash flashed in the sky. Someone called his comrades to maintain formation and ordered the archers to kill enemies in the trees. The mercenary pointed his finger forward and said that the monsters that attacked the caravan from behind were destroyed. The warrior frowned furiously and suggested dealing with the remaining goblins in the center. Looking at him, the young man noted their amazing teamwork and thought that they were all great fighters and that even among them, there were those who especially stood out. The man opened his mouth wide and let out a battle cry. His long, broad sword cut through several monsters at once. The swordsman's eyes widened and he was surprised that his friend could wield such a massive 2-handed sword so easily in the thick of the forest. Suddenly, someone crashed into him from behind. The mercenary cut the air above his head with his sword and asked him to be careful. The adventurer apologized. The next second, he accidentally stepped on someone's cloak and apologized again. The stars shone above the dark forest and Leon's apologies echoed through it every now and then. Sitting down on the ground, Leon thought about how such people only got in everyone's way and realized that he would only get in everyone's way if he continued to fight like this. Gritting his teeth, the guy decided that he should have known how to keep a reasonable distance from his comrades and wondered if he could make his sense of aura a little more perfect and stable. The young man imagined his comrades swinging their swords and thought about how he needed to concentrate on not interfering with the other fighters' trajectories and keeping his own space. In the distance, a goblin jumped on the warrior from behind. Finding the best trajectory, the swordsman ran up to him and killed the monster. Karen saw the mercenary thank his ally for saving him. The girl smiled and said that her friend was growing up before her eyes. Another green flash appeared in the sky. The monster with its severed head lay on the ground. Grinning, Gustav shouted that the goblin attack had been repelled and asked if there were any injured people here. The guys looked at each other. The man said that the scouts would have to work a little more, and the rest could disperse to their wagons. The adventurer looked at him in surprise when the commander asked him to stay for a while because there was still work for him. The mercenary smiled widely and said that they wanted to go hunting for a troll. Leon nervously knitted his eyebrows and asked what that meant. The woman put her hand on his shoulder and suggested that the guards were going to catch the troll. Putting his fist to his mouth, the warrior confirmed this and added that he had already discussed the matter with the guild master. The monster's eyes flashed. Trolls have completely different attitudes towards the strong and the weak. The monsters ran away when they saw the ranger. Gustav explained that if a rank demonstrated his strength in front of them, they would most likely never return to this area again. Karen narrowed her eyes and asked if he was really suggesting that she not interfere. Using his hands in fear, the man explained that it was just a recommendation and suggested that they just give up on the idea of catching the troll if they didn't like his proposal. The girl looked at her friend and asked what they should do. Leon asked why she was asking him about it. Closing her eyes, the woman remembered that he had never encountered them before and suggested that he take this chance to fight the troll. The monster turned around. It was a medium-sized creature that usually lived in forests and swamps and dominated the area with its unique regenerative ability and physical strength. The boy imagined demonic monsters and thought that the troll was very different from the monsters that were summoned by satanic techniques. Remembering the preacher in demonic form, the young man decided that the experience gained from fighting him would be quite useful. In the past, the sword in his hand caught fire. The phantom armor immediately closed its eyes. A bright noble light blinded them. The swordsman realized that he was being asked to fight a monster whose body was superior to that of a human, and who possessed special abilities that could not be purified even by a holy sword. The adventurer clenched his fists and accepted the challenge. The ranger closed her eyes and said that she knew her friend would agree. Walking along the forest path, Karen said that she had insurance for this expedition and that she would not complain about not having to personally participate in the battles. The girl raised her index finger and said that she had one condition. The woman turned around and asked the commander to let her friend fight the troll one-on-one. Leon's eyes widened in surprise. The ranger smirked and promised to assist in the hunt if the leader agreed to her condition. He pointed at him and asked him to pay her friend if he killed the monster. Gustav agreed and said that he had already discussed everything with the guild leader. The stars were shining in the sky above the forest. The caravan was moving along the path. Leon glanced at the wagons and said that it had already been 4 days since they entered this forest. In his memories, goblins jumped out of the forest. On the 3rd day, armed gnolls attacked them. Then the kobolds bared their fangs. The boy thought that he had no idea what kind of monsters would attack them now because this was a pattern that no one could foresee. The young man frowned and decided that even moving without stopping, they had not overcome even half of the forest. A map of the area appeared. The swordsman assumed that this was the work of trolls and that they had become the target of all the monsters of this forest. Goblins appeared in front of the troll. The strength of the attackers does not pose a big threat, but the fundamental solution is to catch the one who manipulates them from the shadows. The adventurer smiled and asked if it was possible that after all their observations of them, the trolls would not attack their caravan. Goblins said that such a scenario was also possible. Suddenly, her eyes widened in fear. Leon asked what happened to her. A giant boulder appeared in the air above the cart. The boulder crushed the cart. The trees in the forest shook. Shocked exclamations were heard. The stone crushed a man. It was an instant death. In the last raid, no one died, and now they lost 3 in just one attack. Next to the pool of blood lay a black eye patch. A smiling owner of this eye patch surfaced in the memory. Leon menacingly squeezed it in his fist. The girl looked up and asked him to get ready, because the enemies are already here. Another boulder appeared in the sky above them. The squad assumed that it was the trolls throwing stones. The horse reared. The driver panicked and shouted that they had no idea where the next stone would fall. The boy picked up his sword. The young man saw the stone above his head and compared this attack to an attack by a catapult because the projectiles were flying from hundreds of meters away. Someone ordered everyone to scatter around the area to avoid the boulders. The swordsman gritted his teeth and wondered if he would be able to cut the stone using the eclipse. Gustav ran forward and swung his sword, ordering everyone to be silent. His sword slammed into a huge boulder. The man clenched his teeth in fury. He managed to cut the stone in two. The mercenaries' eyes widened in shock. Their leader fell to the ground. The commander turned around and ordered them to line up. The light of torches was visible in the shadows of the trees. The warrior called Eagle, Crimson Sword and Sharpshooter to hide the carts and cover and asked the rest to beware of monsters that could appear at any moment. The adventurer's mouth dropped open in surprise, and he thought about how his comrade had calmed the men down in a second and given them clear instructions on what to do next. The men noticed strange sounds coming from the forest. At the same moment, various monsters ran out from behind the trees. Gustav frowned menacingly and decided that if things continued like this, there would be too many of them, and shouted that the priority now was to destroy the trolls. Hansen and Hamel looked around when the leader asked them to take 4 mercenaries with them and find out where the trolls were so that they could immediately engage in battle. The man's mouth dropped open, and he ordered them to kill the monsters so that they could no longer throw stones. The woman looked back and said that they would go to the one that was furthest away from all the others. The commander realized that the guys had already determined his location and said that he was counting on them. The heroes ran deeper into the forest. A group of goblins jumped out at them. The ranger smiled widely, realizing that they were trying to block her path, and asked if they really wanted to die that badly. Karen rushed forward and began tearing the enemies to pieces. Having dealt with them, the adventurers ran on. The girl narrowed her eyes and asked her friend to get ready as they were almost there. Leon tensely clenched his teeth. In front of them was a huge troll. The monster was holding a boulder in his hand, and behind his back was a club. Pouting, the woman said that she would block the retreat, and asked her comrade to fight him to victory. The ranger smiled and hoped that he had not forgotten about the one-on-one fight with the troll. Leon imagined the battlefield as a grid and thought about how they approached the enemy faster than he could notice them, taking advantage of the distance from the other mercenaries. The monster turned around. The guy decided to take advantage of the fact that these creatures have night vision. His sword began to emit a bright, cleansing light. The monster covered its eyes with its hands and roared. The young man lunged forward and realized that he could kill it with one blow. Suddenly, rocks pierced his face. The troll dug his fingers deep into the ground. With a sharp movement of his hand, the monster threw pieces of soil and rocks forward. Facing his face with his hands, the swordsman realized that the enemy had begun to attack indiscriminately because he had lost his sight, and he decided that he had to break through at all costs. A sharp stone left a cut on his cheek. The monster opened its red eyes. The adventurer realized that the enemy had managed to restore his sight, and thought that this was too incredible a healing power. The troll took a club from behind his back. The monster raised it above its head. Leon saw a log in his hands and decided that if the blow fell on him from such a height, then a fatal outcome would be inevitable. Leon remembered how he managed to repel Gustav's frontal attack. The man smiled. The boy thought that it was just training. The young man bared his teeth and realized that he could not afford a single mistake. The opponents rushed towards each other. The swordsman dodged the blow with the club. Having made a dash forward, the adventurer realized that his enemy was too fast and decided to get a little closer to make a counterattack. Leon jumped up to avoid a cutting blow. The next moment, he had to jump to the side to avoid a chopping blow. Leon rushed forward and thought that he had very little time left. The monster again plunged its fingers into the ground. The boy covered his eyes with his hands so that the dust would not blind them. He managed to jump to the side and dodge a new attack. Frowning, the youth realized that the enemy's attacks were only club strikes and mud throws, preventing him from getting close enough, and decided that he needed to take 2 more steps to strike him with his sword. The swordsman pressed himself against a tree and thought that the enemy had left him no other choice. The blade of his sword began to glow. The adventurer opened his mouth and remembered that he did not want to use this technique as it needed some refinement. The monster flinched when it noticed him. The troll turned around. The monster raised its club above its head to deliver a crushing blow. Leon smirked and thought that the enemy intended to take advantage of the opportunity while he was focused on his aura, but that was exactly what was required of him. The sword emitted powerful energy due to the use of the eclipse skill. Leon slashed the air in front of him with his sword. The severed leg flew into the air. The severed limbs of the monster fell to the ground. A star appeared above the boy's head, and he mentally asked the enemy if he liked the combat power and super high heat of the eclipse. The troll fell on its back and screamed loudly in unbearable pain. The monster turned around and tried to escape. Gritting his teeth in rage, the boy shouted that he had come all this way to kill him and asked if the enemy, who used weak creatures as pawns, really thought he could escape from him. The monster jumped onto a tree branch. The troll's eyes widened in madness and roared. The swordsman, covered in holy energy, asked if the enemy, who could only attack unilaterally, really thought he would be allowed to escape. In his memories, Gustav offered his younger comrade to drink beer with them. The boy with the patch on his eye scratched his head in embarrassment. After a while, he was crushed by a stone thrown into the caravan. The adventurer raised his fist and thought that they had not known each other for long, but despite this, none of them deserved such a needless death. Leon opened his mouth wide and called out to the fleeing enemy. Leon rushed forward, leaving behind a trail of bright energy. The constellation of the Great Chariot appeared in the sky above the forest. A strip of bright aura flashed between the trees. A blast wave rolled through the forest after it. With one swing of his sword, the boy cut the troll's body in half. The dead monster stuck out its tongue. Closing his eyes, the young man realized that he had managed to do it, and that now he could breathe a sigh of relief, and thought about the fact that Merak consumed a huge amount of aura, unlike Eclipse. The swordsman turned around and realized that he was not able to use this technique twice with the amount of aura he currently had, even if his body was in perfect condition. Karen smiled and was surprised that her friend had actually defeated the monster, and said that he shouldn't have expected anything else from him. The girl closed her eyes and said that she had blocked the enemy's escape route just in case. The adventurer asked if his efforts had been in vain. The woman denied it, and praised him for his excellent work. Leon squeezed the hilt of his sword and realized that he had been able to correctly implement the basic principle, even though the technique had not been honed properly. Leon clenched his fist and thought about how he had dealt with the monster himself, without anyone's help and using only his own strength. Suddenly his legs gave way and the guy began to fall. The ranger sat down on the ground so that he fell into her lap. Smiling, Karen assumed that he had a hard time because of the last technique he had used and promised to deal with the rest. The girl put her hand to her comrade's forehead and praised him again. Seeing himself in the starry space, the young man wondered when he had fallen asleep. The swordsman opened his mouth and thought that he had not felt such calm for a long time. Suddenly, the adventurer opened his eyes and realized that he should not be so calm. Leon frowned and decided that an injustice could happen to someone at this time. Leon gritted his teeth and wanted to become stronger than his opponent. Leon appeared in front of him, looking at him with disdain. The guy woke up and opened his eyes wide. He was lying on the wooden floor of the carriage. The young man sat up and tried to remember what happened yesterday. Suddenly, a severe headache pierced him. The swordsman fell back onto the pillow and decided that one day would not be enough to recover from this. His hand was shaking. The adventurer remembered that he had a gift that the bishop gave him just for such cases. Leon took out the sacred pendant. Leon pressed it to his chest and activated the recovery process. He looked at his hands and noticed that this magic was giving an even better effect than one might think, because it completely erased all the fatigue in his body. The guy imagined a smiling geezer and mentally thanked him. Looking into the cart, Karen noticed that her friend was awake and could already move, and asked how he was feeling. The girl was sitting on the roof of the cart. The young man answered that he was able to quickly recover thanks to the relic that the elf gave him, and asked what happened yesterday. The heroes walked through the camp. The woman said that the troll hunt was successful and that they managed to catch 3 monsters out of 4. But the one that managed to escape got it pretty bad, so it definitely won't appear in this forest a second time. In the memory, the monster opened its mouth in fear, trying to run away. The swordsman frowned angrily and called them cowards. The ranger smiled and said that their entire group was broken, so they would not even look towards the forest until they increased their number. The adventurer noticed a bloody corpse to the side. Dead monsters were lying at the edge of the forest. Presenting a handful of gold coins, Karen said that they could get about 90 coins for them, because their blood was an ingredient for advanced potions, which is why mages happily buy troll corpses. Throwing a menacing look at her companion, the girl said that because of him, they would only be able to get half the price for one of the corpses, because the monster's body was cut in half and there was almost no blood left in it. Leon turned pale in embarrassment and said that he was very sorry. Leon turned around as his friend walked ahead. The guy glanced at the corpses lying on the ground and guessed that the first one had been struck down by at least 4 types of weapons, and the second one he had killed himself. The boys saw the crushed head of the third monster and realized who could have done it. An image of Gustav striking the monster with his broadsword appeared in his mind. The boys looked around when someone called out to them. Arnold and his Elsed were standing in front of them. Clouds were floating in the sky. The man praised the heroes for the excellent work they had done last night. The woman turned to him and explained that they were only doing the job they were given. The merchant called her words noble. The swordsman frowned and asked how many people were hurt yesterday. The heroes looked at him silently. Guild member Stam lowered his head and reported that 8 people were killed and another 21 were injured, and that several people would be forced to stay in a neighboring settlement. The adventurer clenched his fist. Arnold promised to help with the burial and treatment of the wounded. The ranger looked at her friend with concern. She raised her hand and asked about the price for the trolls. The man said he would definitely pay them. The merchant scratched his head and said that they were worth 30 gold pieces for each of them, and that they were willing to pay the full price for one of the corpses that was cut in half. Karen raised her hand and said that 15 gold pieces would be enough for him because she did not want to haggle. Cumulus clouds floated across the blue sky. Leon looked at his friend and asked why she refused the money when they could get much more. The girls said that it was not an act of generosity, and that one day they would have to repay in kind. The woman smiled and explained that now that they were together, she no longer needed to depend on anyone. Leon's mouth fell open in surprise. Gustav raised his hand. The man placed it on his comrade's shoulder, and was glad that he did not get it so badly. The squad leader smiled and asked his comrade to call him by his name. Suddenly, he squinted and asked what technique his friend used when he fought that troll. On the ground were 2 halves of the monster's body. The mercenary noticed that it was strikingly different from the usual sword strikes, and said that he was impatiently waiting for his ally to wake up to ask this question. The guy frowned and replied that it was his secret fencing technique. The warrior immediately apologized for his curiosity. The young man lowered the corners of his lips and asked if everything was okay with the rest of the squad. Gustav shuddered tensely and replied that there were no problems with them. Hansen was lying on the floor. Hamel leaned against a tree. They got off with small scratches. Leonik showed his biceps. Everything was fine with him. The man stroked his comrade on the head and asked him not to bother his head with such thoughts. The commander closed his eyes and told him that they were doing dangerous work and were prepared to die, and many even carried a will on their chests. The mercenary hit his friend in the chest and said that his heart would always regret the deaths, but he should not let this feeling destroy him. The warrior waved his hand and left. The swordsman looked after him with a smile on his face. The ranger approached him and explained that regret and grief are natural feelings that only the living experience, and that make their hearts beat. Karen smiled and added that this feeling in himself cannot be changed in any way, even if others consider him a hero. The girl stroked her friend on the head and asked if her words comforted him. The clouds hung in the sky. The adventurer remembered Elsed once told him something similar, that a person who is driven only by a sense of duty will not last long, and that beliefs and personal values are not a source of endless fuel. The woman raised her index finger and asked if her companion knew the desert area. Leon raised his eyebrows and wondered what she was talking about. In the desert area, the entire surface was covered in sand, not earth. There was an animal's skull lying on the sand, there was almost no rain, and the temperature at night was very different from the day, so it was impossible to live there. People in robes stood next to monsters. Nomads who wandered the wide sandy plains had to fight countless monsters every day. Leon looked at his friend in fear. She smiled and told him that near the border, the desert was not that big, so they could cross it in just a week on a cart. The boy frowned and said that from what she said, it seemed like it wasn't a desert at all. The caravan was traveling along the road. The boy asked when they would be able to reach the desert if they didn't stay in the small settlements for too long. The ranger replied that the journey would take about 5 days. The swordsman looked at his sword and thought that by then Elsed might have woken up. Imagining the grinning Elsed, the adventurer realized that he hadn't heard from him for a month and had already missed his chatter. Karen looked out of the cart, her eyes shining. The caravan left the forest and began to move through the desert. The squad set up camp on the sand dunes. Leon reached into his backpack to get a map. The sword lying nearby began to glow. Its hilt emitted bright energy. Elsid flew out of it and announced his return. Leon opened his mouth in fear and exclaimed. The boy fell to the floor and looked at his companion. The holy sword looked down at him. The young man smiled. Elsid asked why his master had fallen. The swordsman pointed at him and said that he was scared by his sudden appearance. The spirit clenched his teeth. Elsid spread his arms and asked the owner to imagine how he had slept for a month and was finally able to wake up, and asked if he would not like to shake himself with all his might. The adventurer understood the reason for his shrill screams. Leon turned away and wanted to go back in time. The holy sword was indignant that his student was scolding him. Although they had not seen each other for a long time, and said that he would be very happy if that evil bishop had beaten him back then. Elsid crossed his arms over his chest and reminded that the master should not behave like that. Leon reminded that he had once been like that too. The spirit frowned and reminded that he was self-taught and that he had no mentor. Elsid smirked and suggested not to waste time and wanted to listen for a while to the story of what had happened during that month. The boy confidently knitted his brows and agreed. Orange clouds floated across the sky. The holy sword opened its mouth in shock when it learned that the preacher had revealed his true colors and that the one who had been disguised as an adventurer had become its owner's partner. The boy remembered how Karen had knelt down in front of him and told him that she could be trusted since her dark past had not tainted her personality, scratching his chin. Elsid decided that she really had no need to betray him and said that the biggest danger to an incompetent fighter was an assassin. The spirit looked at the student and asked if his skills had improved during this time, or if he had simply been doing nothing for the past month. The swordsman frowned and said that he couldn't test it anyway. Elsid snapped his fingers and asked if its owner was unsure of himself. The holy sword looked at the status window and widened its eyes in shock. The adventurer's mouth dropped open in surprise and he realized that he had surpassed Leon's abilities. Imagining the blonde with a sword in his hands, Leon remembered that he had seen his true strength when they had a sword fight and thought about how his opponent had also been training for the past few months. Leon frowned sternly and decided that there was a limit to the experience one could gain at the academy, so the student was unlikely to train harder than him. Losing his eye, Elsid assumed that this was some kind of system error and asked if he had really slept for several months instead of one. The spirit smiled and was glad that his master had worked hard even in his absence. Looking at him, Elsid noticed that his 7-star sword skill had reached level 1 and realized that he had learned some new moves. The guy remembered how he had managed to cut the troll in half and replied that for now he could do nothing but Merrick. Nodding, the holy sword stated that the student had exceeded his expectations even so and suggested that he had a natural talent for teaching. Scratching his nose, Elsid added that it was only thanks to him that the talentless student had grown so much. The youth turned white with indignation. The spirit beamed with happiness and called himself a natural mentor, and the swordsman said that he was grateful to him with all his heart. Looking to the side, Elsid smelled sand and asked where they were. A cloud of sand rose above the carriage, and the holy sword noticed that they had gone somewhere far away. Raising his index finger, the adventurer reminded them that they were supposed to go to the Titan mountain range and replied that they were heading there, along with an escort mission. Looking at the sand dunes, Elsid called it a good idea and asked if they wouldn't make too big a circle if they went through the desert. Throwing a surprised look at him, Leon asked what he was talking about and explained that there was no shorter road than this. Leon opened the map and explained that he had no idea that there was a road that went through a mountain range or a canyon. Suddenly, the spirit's eyes widened in shock. Elsid opened his mouth wide and asked why there was a desert here, and the boy said that there had been a desert here 100 years ago. Pointing to the sand, the holy sword said that there had been a wide field here 300 years ago, and asked how a desert could have appeared here in that time if there had been no drastic change in the climate in the area. Elsid imagined a forest path and explained that this could not have happened naturally, and suggested that someone had deliberately turned the place into a desert. The spirit squinted and explained that someone had been doing this for a very long time, because otherwise people would have noticed that something was wrong and decided that this someone had carefully disguised everything as natural changes. The boy imagined lightning striking from the magic circles and thought that even with the help of magic, it was impossible to turn such a huge area of land into a desert. Alcid looked away and said that it looked very dubious. The swordsman frowned and wondered if his companion was so sure that this was someone's plot. Smiling, the holy sword realized that it was too late to start any kind of investigation and asked its owner not to waste his nerves and do something useful. The adventurer menacingly clenched his fist and offered to teach him at least something. Grinning, Leon remembered that, be that as it may, not even half a year had passed since they were connected and was surprised that his companion was able to fill the emptiness inside him. Leon happily closed his eyes and was glad that he had such a friend. Karen watched in confusion as her friend talked to himself. The sun was shining brightly in the sky above the desert. The girl sat down on the floor of the cart and was indignant that it was so hot here. She heard some sound and looked away. The guy was happily polishing his sword with a wreck. Waving her hand at herself, the woman noticed that her companion was in a good mood and asked what had happened to him. The young man turned around and thought that it was because his comrade had returned. Alcid silently looked at the desert. The swordsman realized that he had taken his absence too hard. Pulling the reins of his horse, Gustav ordered everyone to stop to set up camp, make a fire and cook dinner. The adventurer looked away and said that it was time to stop. Putting her hand on his head, the ranger told him that the deserts had very cold and dark nights, and explained that if you take this sudden change in temperature lightly you could have big problems. Karen jumped out of the cart. Leon told his companion that they also needed to go. The spirit did not pay attention to him and silently looked ahead. Imagining Rodrigo walking through the forest, Alcid had realized that there was not even a small clearing from his memories left here and was surprised that after 300 years everything turned out this way. Leon looked at him in surprise. Smiling sheepishly, the holy sword asked for forgiveness and noticed that its owner was already being called. A cauldron of soup hung over the fire. The mercenaries sitting around it invited their comrades to their place so that they could have dinner. Alcid opened his mouth in amazement. The guy was smiling, talking to his girlfriend. Gustav put his hand on his shoulder. Hamel and his companion closed their eyes happily. The spirit smiled and thought that he should cast aside all his anxious thoughts. Alcid had looked up and decided that he didn't care whether it was a desert or a meadow. The stars were shining in the sky. The saint realized that the person living in this era was not him, but its owner. The young man smiled widely. The fire burned out, and only smoldering coals remained. The cart was closed. The swordsman was sleeping on the floor under a blanket. Something made him open his eyes. Throwing off the blanket, the adventurer felt a strange feeling of discomfort and asked what was happening here. Karen put her finger to her mouth and asked him to be quiet. Her eyes lit up. Carts in the middle of the desert. Suddenly something approached them, moving underground. Looking back, the girl said that there were many enemies and asked what they should do. Frowning, the woman explained that she had not noticed them until they came too close and assumed they were not going to fight, as they did not emit any deadly energy. The sentries were on duty, but they did not pay attention to the creatures. The ranger explained that inexperienced people who did not know how to feel vibrations would never notice the movement of unknown people underground. The enemies headed for the carts with the cargo. The Leon assumed that they were going to commit theft and escape. Karen narrowed her eyes and asked him to make a decision on what to do in this situation. Leon frowned and thought that there was no point in raising the alarm, because they were at a disadvantage the moment they allowed the enemy to penetrate their camp. The mercenaries were fast asleep on the floor. The guy decided that they would not be able to bring themselves to proper fighting condition immediately after waking up. Els had opened his mouth and explained that the strangers also knew that they would not win if they went up against the guild's guards. Grinning, the holy sword added that this was why they had come here with the intention of stealing things without showing any intention of killing anyone, and stated that if they woke everyone up, the party would be able to win, but casualties would be inevitable. The young man smiled nervously and remarked that he was having a lot of fun. Elsid said that this was the first fight in a month and that he would finally get to see his master's skills. The swordsman frowned and asked how many enemies there were. The girl turned around and reported that there were 14 people in her detection zone who were moving towards the cargo, and another 20 who were on guard. Covering his mouth with his hand, the adventurer thought about how frightening their numbers and ability to use this desert environment to their advantage were, and realized that a clumsy first move could work against them. Leon grinned and called out to his older comrade. The woman's brows furrowed in determination. The strangers continued moving under the thick sand. At this time, the ranger was sitting on the roof of the cart. Her blue eyes lit up. Karen jumped up. Green particles flew around her. The girl used spatial magic and summoned sharp CUNI. They were covered in a sparkling aura. At the same time, the daggers rushed down and pierced the sand. The wounded thieves jumped to the surface. Blood splashed on the face of one of them. Leon, standing on the roof of the cart, raised his sword. Its blade emitted a bright, blinding light. The guy opened his mouth wide and shouted that the enemies were aiming at the carts with cargo. Gustav immediately opened his eyes, hearing his voice. Arnold got up from the bed. Sand began to swirl around the carts. The squad members woke up and began to call the fighters. The strangers turned pale with horror. The man raised his sword above his head and ordered everyone to keep in line and remember their priorities, as protecting the guild leader and the cargo must come first. The villains' hats flew into the air and shouts were heard. A man with a sack over his shoulder emerged from the cart. The villain's red eyes flashed, and he declared that they would have succeeded if not for the sudden attack. The thief raised his hand and ordered everyone to retreat. The squad leader noticed that the enemies had dived into the sand again, and called on his comrades not to let them escape. The woman threw a kunai forward and ordered the villain to put it back. The sharp dagger approached the villain. The thief grabbed it with his bare hand. The stranger turned around and narrowed his eyes angrily. The young man's eyes widened in shock when he saw that he had stopped his girlfriend's attack with one hand. The enemy disappeared into the sand and ran away. The ranger looked after him with displeasure. The warrior opened his mouth wide and shouted that the villains were trying to escape. The swordsman looked back. Several thieves were approaching him at once. Elsa narrowed his eyes and asked if it was time to take a look at his student's skills. The holy sword noticed the wilted owner and asked what was wrong with him. The weapon in his hand caught fire. The adventurer swung his sword. Leon raised the weapon above his head and thought that he could destroy a dozen more enemies if he used the secret technique of the Big Dipper sword. Blood splashed on his face. Leon realized that these thieves did not look like ordinary monsters. Besides, the squad was not on the verge of life and death. A sea of blood appeared under his feet. The guide decided that there was no point in committing a unilateral massacre because they were facing ordinary thieves. Elsa's eyes widened in surprise. The young man lowered his head. The spirit said that there was nothing wrong with his doubts and that hesitating was normal because there was no solution to this problem. Elsa looked ahead and added that he was a hero, not a bandit, and he had to find his own answer to the question of whether he should burn everything in his path or start punishing evil in times of justice. The swordsman lowered the corners of his lips. A scale appeared in the sky. There were universal standards of good and evil. The adventurer realized that he could not set his own standards and decide who to punish and who not. Leon put his hand to his chest and wondered whether he should not allow even the thought of leniency and stab the enemy to death, suppress his powers without taking his life, or try to re-educate him with words and deeds. Leon opened his mouth and thought about how every decision comes from a righteous heart, but each person has his own opinion on which path is more righteous. The boy put his sword back in its sheath. The young man smiled, realizing that his own values had not yet been formed, and said that he would find the answer himself. The tied-up thief fell to his knees. The merchants approached the captives. The light was on in the tent. Arnold frowned menacingly and said that due to the surprise of the attack, part of the cargo was stolen. The members of the squad gathered in the tent. Gustav asked how this could happen, because the enemies, who were caught by surprise, were not even in a state to fight back and cared only about escape. Karen twirled the kunai in her hands and said that among them there was one man with luggage, their boss. The girl introduced the man with red eyes and said that the enemy was acting extremely relaxed and that they acted covertly, trying not to give away their presence, which meant that the cargo was stolen even before the fight began. Looking away, the woman noticed that they did not have that kind of skill and assumed that it was because of an artifact or some other kind of power. So they were lucky that they had come in a crowd and were caught. Everyone present narrowed their eyes and wondered why the enemies had come in a crowd. The swordsman remembered how the scoundrel had caught the kunai with his hand and thought that even if they had hidden their presence with the artifact, They should not forget that the enemy had easily stopped the attack. The adventurer frowned and decided that his sharp gaze was further proof that this was no ordinary person. Covered in a cold sweat, the merchant asked why they had stolen the most valuable cargo and asked the mercenaries to track them down. The commander turned around and asked what his comrade thought about it. Hamel frowned sternly and stated that they needed to set out right now to give chase, since due to the natural characteristics of the desert, tracers left behind would quickly be erased. The sky was dark above the dunes. The man added that even for him the desert was an unknown place, and that their chances of catching up with the enemy were still only 50%, even if they left right now. The tracker took out a kunai and said that she could track them. In the memory, the villain grabbed her dagger with his hand. A trace of green aura remained on his glove. The guild leader smiled widely and promised to take care of the reward for Karen. The girl looked at her friend and said that they would go together. She added that she would need the help of an older comrade. Hamel put his fist to his chest and said that he was ready to give his life for her. Arnold handed them a compass and said that they would need it. The woman took it in her hands and noticed that it was broken. The merchant explained that the stolen box was very difficult to distinguish from ordinary cargo, and that this compass was enchanted to react only to it. The box and the compass were connected by a blue energy band. It turned out that its arrows pointed to the cargo when they were within a 10-meter radius of each other. The man came out of the tent and said that it would be a race against time until sunrise. The squad went in search of the stolen box. Gustav watched them go. Frowning, the commander decided that victory would be theirs since they had an A-rank mercenary with them, and wondered if they would catch the enemy or let him go. The heroes ran through the desert. The warriors shouted that they should not make such mistakes again, and ordered everyone to be on guard and not close their eyes until sunrise. The Pathfinder's eyes lit up. A green trail led deep into the desert. Karen suggested speeding up a little. The guys ran quickly across the sand. Leon's face was covered in sweat. Elsa noticed that his endurance had increased slightly because he was almost keeping up with his comrades despite the desert terrain. Suddenly the girl raised her hand and stopped her friends. The green trail pointed to a narrow gorge. The squad went down. The archer was surprised that there was such a valley in the middle of the desert. The woman put her hand to the rock. Leon asked what happened. The ranger raised her head and explained that this place was artificially built a long time ago. Stars were shining above the gorge. The guy could not believe that a person could create something like this. Hieroglyphs were carved on the rock. Karen assumed that this place was built about 100 years ago, and added that this inscription was almost impossible to read. The young man widened his eyes and understood what was going on. Squinting, the holy sword confirmed that his thoughts were correct and decided that this place was the reason why this area turned into a desert. The swordsman asked if one depression in the ground could make the area desert. Frowning, Elsad replied that this was unrealistic and stated that they were dealing with an unusual place. The spirit imagined energy spreading through the forest, and explained that it was the center of a spiritual vein that flowed through the meadows and clearings. The ground began to crack. Elsad explained that now there was nothing left of that energy, and the soil had turned into dead earth on which nothing could grow. The adventurer frowned sternly and asked who could have dug up the spiritual vein, and for what purpose. The holy sword rolled its eyes and suggested that he find out for himself. The heroes walked along the gorge. The girl turned around and asked if her friend felt anything. She narrowed her eyes and said that there were 2 guards ahead and behind them was an entire army of enemies. Leon's eyes widened in fear when the woman asked what they should do. A deep gorge stretched across the desert. Apparently thieves had found this abandoned building and began to use it as a base, gradually strengthening their power in the desert. There were guards at the gate. The ranger explained that she felt that there were more than 100 people inside. Karen smirked and asked if they should kill them all. Leon clutched his sword and wondered if he should complete the mission and kill every last one of them. He imagined rivers of blood around him and wondered how his actions would be any different from a brutal massacre. Suddenly, his mouth dropped open in surprise when one of the scoundrels said that their raid today had been in vain. The criminal raised his hand and said that half of the squad had been caught, which caused the chieftain to kill 2 more in a fit of anger. His comrade decided that they should not have touched the guild caravan, and that they should attack travelers in groups of 5 or 6. The merchant clasped his palms together in front of the killer. The bandit remembered how a few days ago they had come across a family and how the father of the family had begged them to spare at least the child. The little boy stood next to his dead parents. The guard turned to his colleague and told them that they had fulfilled his will. The thief said that it was quite funny because a child abandoned in the desert would wither under the scorching sun. The boy walked through the desert alone. Hearing the laughter, the swordsman lowered his head and thought about how he tried to find a reason not to kill these people. But now there was no need. His sword was enveloped in a bright aura. In the past, Elcid had frowned and explained that hesitation was normal and that his students should choose his own path. Suddenly, one of the criminals flipped in the air. The adventurer dashed forward and used an eclipse to destroy them. Leon swung his sword and said that this was his answer. Elcid smiled contentedly. The party ran through the gate. Running forward along the corridor, Karen noticed that there were too many enemies and suggested that they focus on small groups. The girl looked back and said that she would take the initiative while her comrades simply followed her. At that moment, she rushed forward. Karen's eyes widened in surprise and decided that his ally was seriously angry. The woman approached one of the bandits from behind. She managed to cut his throat and his comrades. The tracker jumped forward. Karen killed all the villains who got in her way. Hiding behind a rock, the thief wondered who she was and decided to report the invasion to the chief as soon as possible. Suddenly, Undertaker appeared next to him. Sand rose from the ground. A loud scream was heard. The girl brushes her long hair. Smiling happily, she said that it was very refreshing and added that after a long ride in the cart, her body seemed to have turned to stone. The woman looked at her friends and said that you need to constantly warm up like this so that everything in life is good. The man asked if their ally had always been like this. Leon confirmed it. The boy approached his friend and noticed blood on her face. He wiped it with his finger. The ranger blushed with embarrassment. Karen immediately turned away. The girl ran forward and suggested that they speed up. The archer put his hand on his comrade's shoulder and called him a professional. The young man asked what he was talking about. The warrior pouted and said that his comrade would understand everything himself one day in the distant future. There were 2 guards at the gate. Peeking out from around the corner, the woman said that the compass pointed to this door and decided to sneak in as a shadow to check it out. The heroes hid behind a rock. The ranger asked her friends to deal with the guards and begin the invasion. Undertaker's shadow enveloped her. Seeing that she melted into thin air, Hamel was surprised that an orang had such amazing skills that were beyond praise. The man pulled the bowstring and suggested that they begin the fight. The arrow had a firecracker with a lit fuse on the tip. The arrow flew straight towards the guards. The thieves tried to open the box, but they were unable to do so. A leader, crossing his arms over his chest, called them useless and ordered them to quickly open the box. The criminals stood at the table and tried to pick the lock. Suddenly the door behind them exploded. A powerful gust of wind hit the criminal, and he realized that someone was attacking them. The robber looked at the doorway from which smoke was pouring. The warriors entered the room. The villain's eyes widened and he realized that they were people from the guild. The archer frowned and said that they had come to return the stolen goods. Lowering his head, the villain was surprised that they had reached this gate without a single scratch and decided that he had better run away because it was better not to come face to face with them. Suddenly, the Undertaker appeared behind him and swung his knife. The stranger immediately kicked him. A deep cut appeared on his shin. The thief fell on his back. The shadow plunged the knife into the ground and said that his opponent had dodged it well, because according to the plan, his body should have cooled down by now. The plague doctor flashed his burning eyes and said that if they had met 4 years ago, the enemy would not have given him a chance to even hit his ankle. With his crazy eyes widened, the criminal wondered why this person knew about his past and thought that it could not be because everyone who knew about him was already dead. A cloud of dust rose in front of the shadow. Karen's face appeared from it. The robber realized that there was only one person who could know about his past. The girl frowned and said that they had not seen each other for a long time. Mole's eyes turned bloodshot. His henchmen pounced on the Leons. The squad members quickly dealt with them. Hamel lowered his weapon and said that they seemed to have dealt with everyone. Leon turned around when the man asked about the leader. The woman stood in front of the thief sitting on the ground. Blood was running down his leg. Twisting a cane in her hand, the ranger asked if he remembered her promise to kill him with her own hands if the enemy did not leave this sphere forever. Karen pointed daggers at him and wished him death. She cast a menacing look at the enemy. The criminal's pupils narrowed. The robber dug his fingers into the sand and said that he had changed a lot over the years. The villain jumped back. Imagining dying people under the enemy's feet, the villain thought that this was the appearance of the Undertaker, known as the horror of the dark world during his reign, and realized that the difference in their powers was too great. The mole dove into the sand and decided that the winner of their fight was known from the start, and that only death awaited him. The thief began to move underground around the enemy. The girl lowered the corners of her lips and asked if this was a protest. She pointed the daggers underground and ordered the enemy to die. The cane pierced the criminal's hand. The woman looked down at him and asked how many times he could withstand her attacks. The robber raised his hands in front of him. The pathfinder immediately pointed her daggers at him. Several cuts appeared on his hand. Sharp blades cut his mask. The gas mask flew off his head. The dagger froze in the air. The villain fell to his knees, smoke coming out of his mouth. The squad members looked at him menacingly. The villain leaned on his hands. Karen watched him carefully. The mole frowned and laughed madly, calling his opponent a real monster. The girl frowned sadly when the thief asked why she was doing this to him. The robber opened his mouth angrily and said that she had a good life. The criminal pictured a little girl sitting on the ground and reminded her that they had taken in an orphan no one wanted off the street and made her stronger. At that moment, the villain extended his hand to her. The dead leader of the gang lay on the floor. Looking up, the villain asked why she had so much resentment and said that she had no need to destroy the entire organization. The woman frowned sternly and asked if she had ever asked to be made stronger. The mole smirked and said that if the organization had not given her shelter, she would have died in some gutter somewhere. Looking down, the tracker decided that was true and said that avoiding the worst-case scenario did not mean that everything else was the best. The thief narrowed his eyes and asked what that meant. Imagining a bloody Sienna behind her, Karen explained that her life consisted of only things she never wanted and that such power was not her cherished desire, so she decided to get her hands on what her heart carved. The criminal closed his eyes and asked what she wanted in that case. The girl clenched her fist and answered that she wanted to be free. The robber's eyes widened in shock. He smiled widely and asked what that meant. Frowning angrily, the villain shouted that no one held her by force and asked why she needed to share this damned freedom with everyone else. Next to the children lay a dagger. The villain declared that they did not want freedom and that she, too, had no other path or hope for survival. The woman dumbfoundedly pursed her lips. All covered his face with his hand and explained that he was just a ghostly darkness. The pathfinder extended her hand. Karen sat down next to her opponent and hugged him. The thief raised his eyebrows in surprise when she apologized and assumed that it was because she had to leave them. The girl looked away. Leon watched them silently. In the past, Leon extended his hand to his friend. The woman rose to her feet and ordered her old acquaintance to survive at any cost. The criminal looked at her in surprise. The tracker ran to her friends. Stopping, she apologized for the delay and asked what happened to the box. The compass pointed to the right box. Karen suggested that they take the stolen goods first. The girl looked back and decided that it was time for them to go back. Suddenly, the ground shook under the squad members' feet. The woman clenched her teeth. The robber pressed the red button. The villain grinned maliciously and asked the enemy to take a close look at the real them. The guy frowned and shouted that it was the self-destruct button and that they urgently needed to get out of here. The walls of the corridor began to explode. The ceiling above the villain's head began to collapse. The blast wave rolled across the entire gorge. Dust had turned around when Lennox asked him to look at it. The man smiled and nodded. 3 silhouettes were visible behind the sand cloud. The heroes were returning back to the camp. The sun was shining over the desert. Now they could forget about exploring the canyon forever. Since everything was destroyed because of the self-destruct button, the guys decided that they were very lucky to get out of that trap. Frowning, Elsid had asked the owner not to dwell on it, because this place had been hidden from everyone for over 100 years, and decided that whoever created this canyon did not leave a single clue. The Holy Sword closed his eyes and suggested discussing it later. The ranger sitting on the roof of the cart called her friend. The guy asked what happened. Karen smiled and said that they were there. The caravan was moving towards the fortress town of Barkas. The young man's mouth fell open in surprise. The carts pulled up to the gates. The swordsman said that he had never seen anything like it before. Seeing her eyes, the girl explained that it was nothing surprising and said that this was a border town that protected the border and was ruled by a marquis. Arnold shook the guard's hand. It turned out that the king had given this town the right to have its own independent troops. The caravan was moving along the street. The man raised his hand and said that they would stay here for 3 days to put the caravan in order and replenish their supplies. The merchant turned around and asked what his allies were going to do. The adventurers' eyes widened and they asked what he was talking about. The guild leader extended his hand and explained that they could stay where they were or do something else. Raising her index finger, the woman said that she wanted to find something and asked him to tell her the address of the place where they were staying. There was a small building nearby. Arnold said that 3 blocks away there was a tavern called Goat Song, where they rented rooms. In one of the rooms there was a double bed. The man said that the guys could do with it as they liked. The Leon pupils narrowed. The ranger's eyes widened intensely. Leon smiled awkwardly and asked if they would really have 1 room for 2. The merchant confirmed this and asked if they wouldn't be more comfortable that way. The guy blushed and thought about having to stay in the same room with his girlfriend. Karen put her hand on his shoulder and asked what had embarrassed him so much. The girl asked if he really had any expectations. The young man shouted that he hadn't thought about anything like that and hurried away. The guild leader frowned and decided that he had done something wrong again. The woman laughed and said that everything was fine. The ranger winked at him and said that she would not be able to sleep at night. She waved her hand and left. Suddenly Karen stopped when Arnold offered to prepare another room for her. The girl lowered her hand. Her whole face turned red. The woman refused the offer. At that moment, she disappeared. The woman lowered her head and sighed with relief. The ranger was sitting on the roof of one of the houses. Imagining her comrade with a sword in his hands, the adventurer thought about how powerful allies would always be near the hero and decided that she was his first ally. But there was no guarantee that it would always be like this. Karen put her hand to her chest and wondered what would happen if someone with a more outstanding talent appeared and whether she would have the opportunity to be with her comrade. The girl frowned and decided to make him think about how she should always be near him and nothing else. The woman looked around the city. Her eyes lit up. The swordsman closed his eyes and said that he would bother his girlfriend again and explained that even at the academy, boys of different genders lived separately. Elsa narrowed his eyes and called him stupid. Arnold raised his fist to his mouth and cleared his throat. The man apologized for putting his comrade in such an awkward position. The adventurer scratched the back of his head and replied that he had done nothing wrong. Raising his index finger, Leon asked what kind of box the guild was so desperate to return and suggested that it was something special. The merchant frowned and said that what the cargo was an important secret. Leon beamed with impatience. Approaching him, the guild master decided not to be too strict with the man who risked his life to return it and asked his comrade to keep it a secret. Arnold leaned towards his ear and said that there was a black crystal inside the box. The box contained a precious stone. Since it was a first-class product without impurities, its cost was almost 1,000 gold coins. Introducing the man in royal clothes, the man said that this item was ordered by Lord Reuben himself, who governed the city through which the caravan would pass. Smiling nervously, the merchant explained that the lord was a high-ranking nobleman and that if someone like them fell into his disfavor, this person would take revenge, without distinguishing who was right and who was wrong. Leon frowned in confusion and understood why this cargo had to be returned. The guild master said that his life depended on it. Clouds floated across the sky. The boy looked into the carriage in search of his girlfriend. There was a note attached to the wooden floor. Taking it in his hands, the young man read that his partner would be back soon and thought that she had gone in search of something. People approached him from behind. The mercenary squad frowned menacingly. Gust asked why their comrade was alone. The swordsman smiled and replied that Karen had gone somewhere. The squad members looked away and were upset that she was not there. The adventurer looked at them in confusion. It turned out that the guys were really looking forward to meeting their ally. The man hugged his younger comrade and invited him to go with him. Leon asked where they were going. The commander smiled broadly and replied that they wanted to visit the tavern. The warrior opened his mouth wide and shouted that his subordinates themselves wanted to go with him to the tavern. The blue sky was covered with clouds. Gust offered everyone a drink and said that the first one to vomit would pay for the drink. Night had fallen. A full moon was shining in the sky. A bleeding man lay on the ground. Nearby lay his accomplices beaten. Some time ago, Karen passed by a group of people. One of them put his hand on her shoulder. Now he was lying on the ground under her foot. The girl gave him a menacing look. Her glittering eyes were thirsty for blood. The villain opened his mouth in fear and realized that he was not going to live. The woman said that she only had one question. A local man knelt down and asked what she wanted. The tracker frowned and asked where the biggest gang in the city was, meaning those who controlled such areas as the black market and smuggling. The man smiled and thought that if he told, he would die, and if he did not, he would also die. The stars were shining in the sky above the city. The beaten scoundrel lay unconscious on the ground. The adventurer turned around and realized that this city was controlled by a gang called the Golden Owl. Its crest in the form of a bird appeared. People looked up. It was an organization of traders whose main occupation was smuggling. In addition, they held high government positions and earned huge amounts of money. The Marquis of the city of Barcus narrowed his eyes. There were rumors that he also gave them his support. Karen took a step forward and thought that this was only adding to her problems. She looked down. The girl stopped. There was a crest of the Golden Owl on the building. Standing in front of the door, the woman remembered that she was here 10 years ago, and her feet still remembered the road. In the past, Leon smiled and asked why she had such a nickname. The ranger decided that she did not need to make a secret out of it, and said that it was all because of the method of coded communication. Zion raised his eyebrows in surprise and asked what it meant. It turned out that all the dark organizations used their own individual method of secret messaging. The man handed someone a card with a skull on it. In the case of the Spider organization, the main requirement was a visit to the local funeral home. The undertaker's eyes lit up. The members of the organization placed the contents of the request and the fee for the work into the coffin. The guy sat down on a log. The adventurer explained that usually gangs do not complicate the procedure for accepting a request and use simpler and more direct methods. A light above the door lit up. Usually it was needed to cause an optical illusion and create a false entrance. The real door was nearby. Only the one who knew the code could get into it, while the fake would never open. Karen put her hand on the wall and thought that for her, the owner of a dark aura, optical illusions were a mere trifle. Her fingers slipped through the wall. The girl entered the disguised door. The stairs led deep down. A magic circle lit up under the woman's foot. She squinted in confusion. The robed man flinched when he heard a noise. The stranger turned around. The door to the room opened. The ranger looked inside and said hello. Sitting down at the table, the stranger greeted her and asked if she liked their warm welcome. Behind the adventurer was a corridor with many traps. She sat down at the table. The man asked what brought her here. Karen frowned and said that she needed information about Lord Reuben. The robed man opened his mouth in surprise. There was a candle burning on the table. The girl explained that she was going to pay for the information and reminded that the option not to sell it was against their principles. The stranger said that it would cost 800 coins. The woman raised her hand and asked if there were any discounts depending on the value of the information. The stranger replied that they could then reduce the price to 700 gold. And the ranger smiled nervously and asked if there was any other way to lower the price. The adventurer leaned on her hand and realized that it was the butler. The man narrowed his eyes and asked what that meant. Putting a finger to her cheek, Karen complimented his disguise and said that underneath it was the CEO of the Golden Owl and at the same time one of the Marquis's most trusted men. Glenn narrowed his eyes. He removed his hood and called his client rather impudent. Waving her hand, the girl asked about her request and noticed that the seller seemed extremely interested in her offer. Looking at her carefully, the butler thought that she had a very sharp eye and realized that he could not get rid of her because she might be a member of some large guild. The CEO looked down and offered her a price of 260 gold coins. The woman frowned sternly and agreed. The ranger narrowed her eyes when the man called the Lord's fief like a hole in a drained pipe and asked what that meant. Glenn closed one eye and explained that it meant that whoever entered it could not leave. The beer filled the mug to the brim. Leon took a sip. His companion shouted that the drink should flow in like water in a drain pipe. Leon placed the mug on the table. The party members praised him. The waitress approached them and asked what their next destination was. Hamel answered that they were heading to the fief of Lord Reuben. The girl raised her eyebrows in fear. She explained that other mercenaries avoided the place and assumed that they had not heard the rumors yet. Gus turned and asked what they were talking about. The woman explained that people were talking about a monster that ruled the streets at night, that is, a vampire. The guy's eyes widened in surprise when he heard this. Want the next chapter? Smash the like button. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the like button for more epic manhwa recaps.